Om Aim Aim Ishtamantre Kamalapapamukam Bocha Bhuti Swarupe Rupa Prakashe Sakala Gunamaye Nirgune Nirvikare Nastule Noiva Sukshme Apyavidite Vipave Napi Vigyana Tatwe Vishve Vishvantaratme Sarvaranamite Nishkale Nitya Shuddhe. O Mother, thou revealest both the form and the formless. Thou art the embodiment of all attributes. Thou again art without attributes and change. Thou art neither gross nor subtle, and thy glory is incomprehensible. Thou art beyond knowledge, thou art everything, the inmost self of everything, the object of adoration, even to the chief of gods. Thou art the indivisible and eternally pure. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So good morning, friends, in person and online. This is the second in our Bhakti Yoga Sutras series entitled The Greatest Power. Some of you are familiar with the Narada Bhakti Sutras. And if you wish to follow along with your commentary, go right ahead. Just a quick review of the last Sunday's talk. We discussed what divine love is and how to embark on the path of Bhakti Yoga. Divine love is supreme love. Supreme in that it is quantitatively and qualitatively supreme. Quantitatively supreme means an intense love and the deepest possible love. And qualitatively means without any selfish motive. Unlike our human love, which always carries a sense of possessiveness, no matter how vigilant we may be. First, a bhakta, a lover of God, knows God does not belong to one individual only, but to everyone. Second, the Brihadaranaka Upanishad describes the yoga of Bhakti Yoga. Yajnavalkya, the great sage, said to his wife Maitreyi, "It is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the wife that the wife is dear, but for the sake of the self." Here we mean the higher self. And he continued, "It is not for the sake of the gods that the gods are worshipped, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the creatures that the creatures are dear, for the sake of the self." So if we can remember this, our human relationships become divinized. So how do we develop love for God? It sounds simple, but when we analyze ourselves and our spiritual practice, sometimes we think, I have no love. We first develop a relationship with God. And what is that relationship? It can be that of a parent, a master, a friend, a child, or our beloved. So these attitudes towards God are known as Shanta, the peaceful attitude, Dasya, the servant attitude, Sakya, the attitude of friend, Vatsalya, the attitude of a parent, and Madhur, the attitude of the beloved. As our attraction to God grows and our relationship with God deepens, we understand the source of that divine relationship is none other than the light of the Supreme Self within. Therefore, we don't love God to achieve anything. Any treasure that we don't already have is within ourselves. So we love the Lord for the Lord's sake alone. And our love knows no fear. No one can take that treasure away, even if we fall from the goal. We have seen this in the lives of so many devotees. They go through the highs and lows of spiritual life, but at the end, the Lord comes. Yes, he does come. Sarada Devi once said, if a baby plays in mud puddles and gets itself dirty, does the mother throw away the baby? Or does she pick it up, wash him, and then take him on her lap? God is more than our father or mother. Now we come to Sutra 3. Amrita Swarupa Cha. In its intrinsic nature, this divine love is immortal bliss. This divine love is immortal bliss. The Ananda of Satchit Ananda. And as one of our Swamis, revered Swami, Swami Sarvagatananda, disciple of Swami Akhandananda, once explained, this Ananda is the same as Chit, is the same as Sat. In the second sutra, Narada gave the definition of bhakti. He said, bhakti is intense love for God. And so also in his third sutra, divine love is immortal bliss. This is the pinnacle of love, undying love. Bhakti, therefore, is supreme love that never comes to an end. So our ordinary love that we have cannot be unending because the individual who experiences love is limited. We're all limited in our scope. The human recipient of such love is also limited, whether that be husband, wife, friend, child, associate. Furthermore, that love cannot be terminated, can be terminated by the circumstances of death. Yes, if we lose a relation, there is that missing. We miss that. But what is that missing? We're missing that human love, that reciprocity. So all human love, therefore, has a beginning and an end. So we can say divine love is immortal for three reasons. The object of our love, our chosen ideal, is immortal. The bliss-filled devotee who cherishes the Lord in his or her heart becomes therefore a part of God and is also imperishable. And no circumstances can terminate such a relationship between a lover of God and God itself. Whether the masculine form of God or the feminine form or the neuter form, the Atman. So once a bhakta experiences that supreme love, it's an inner experience because the object of our love is within us. It is our essence and therefore is everlasting. Now, it's hard to feel that, but if you're ever in the presence of someone who has realized God, that presence surrounds that individual. You come into that bliss-filled presence. And if you can feel it, so how that recipient must feel, engulfed in that bliss. It is mature bhakti and is therefore no longer a question of aspiring to love and aspiring to direct our attention toward God. Mature bhakti means being established in supreme love. And that means wherein the devotee, the object of devotion, and devotion itself are merged. Our chosen ideal is love itself, and we become love itself. In other words, the devotee is filled with that love, that ananda of Satchidananda. There is no difference. You walk into the presence of a Brahmagyani, you also feel that love. It's unmistakable. It's a tangible presence. How then is such supreme love experienced? And these knowers of Brahman, these knowers of God, never say, I have realized, but you cannot realize. No, no. They say, you too can realize, you must realize in this very life. Sri Ramakrishna once disclosed, after realizing God, one sees that it is God himself who has become the universe and all living beings. He went on, the Divine Mother revealed to me in the Kali temple that it was she who had become everything. She showed me that everything was full of consciousness. The image was consciousness, the altar was consciousness, the water vessels were consciousness, the door seal was consciousness, the marble floor was consciousness, and all was consciousness. I found everything inside the room, he said, soaked, as it were, in bliss, the bliss of Satchidananda. I saw a wicked man in front of the Kali temple, but in him also I saw the power of the Divine Mother vibrating. In other words, one becomes saturated with Ananda, loving consciousness, and experiences that loving consciousness within and also without. One is transformed and the whole world becomes transformed into that living reality. Sutra 4. Yalabdva puman siddho bhavati amrito bhavati tripto bhavati. By attaining it, a devotee becomes perfect, immortal, and satisfied forever. Here the word siddhi means perfect, but it can also mean psychic powers, which is not the meaning here. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali deals with occult powers that may come to an aspirant, even unsought, when following concentration of mind in Raja and Bhakti yogas. But he states the greatest power is to overcome them. Now, why? Because they're obstacles to spiritual growth and can sidetrack one from genuine pursuit of God. The founder of this center, Swami Swahananda, who was the disciple of Swami Vijnanananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, used to tell us in the monastery and convent that when he was a young monk, he practiced Raja Yoga and he developed certain powers of mind. And so when he became the head of the Delhi center, Vrindavan was nearby, and he was very devoted to an incredible holy man who happened to be living in that center, Sarideshananda, who was Holy Mother's disciple. In fact, his diaries as a young boy, when he was serving Holy Mother, became the substance of her life that was later published. And the Vrindavan Center happened to have a hospital, and the Swami would go there, and he loved to touch the patients. And of course, the patients would respond to that touch. But Sarideshananda came to find out, and he said, no, stop that. And the Swami did, of course. So how do such powers come? The word is ojas, which you'll read in Raja Yoga, which means bright or illuminating, and it's the highest form of energy in the human body. If one practices continence and other forms of sadhana, this ojas is stored in the brain, in the human body, and expresses itself as intellectual and spiritual power. Swami Vivekananda explained in his talk in England on lessons in Raja Yoga. He says, it gives a tremendous power of attraction. This ojas is manufactured from the nerve currents. It has this peculiarity. It is most easily made from that force which manifests itself in the sexual powers. If the powers of the sexual centers are not frittered away and their energies wasted, action is only thought in a grosser state. They can be manufactured into ojas. And this is the whole principle in monasticism of chastity. In other traditions, this may not be known, but this is the psychophysiological foundation of continence. The two great nerve currents of the body, the Ida and Pingala, start from the brain. And they go down on each side of the spinal cord, but they cross in the shape of the figure 8 at the back of the head. Thus, the left side of the body is governed by the right side of the head. At the lowest point of the circuit is the sexual center, the sacral plexus. The energy conveyed by these two currents of nerves comes down, and a large amount is continually being stored in the sacral plexus. The last bone in the spine is over the sacral plexus and is described in symbolic language as a triangle. And as the energy is stored up beside it, this energy is symbolized by a serpent. It's known as the serpent power. Sri Ramakrishna used to feel that power. And if you read the gospel closely, he said sometimes it feels like a monkey climbing branch after branch, jumping up, sometimes like a fish, and so on. Vivekananda goes on, consciousness and subconsciousness work through these two nerve currents. But superconsciousness takes off the nerve current when it reaches the lower end of the circuit. And instead of allowing it to go up and complete the circuit, it stops and forces it up the spinal cord as ojas from the sacral plexus. So this is the Kundalini power. As a current travels from one center of the spinal cord to another, and again, there are 7 centers of consciousness, you can travel from one plane of existence to another. Vivekananda continues, this is why the human being is greater than others. Because all planes, all experiences are possible to the spirit in the human body. We do not need another. For man can, if he likes, finish in his body his probation and can after that become pure spirit. Probation meaning reincarnation of lives. He ends by saying, when the ojas has gone from center to center and reaches the pineal gland, man then becomes neither mind nor body. He is free from all bondage. Here, siddhi means perfection in divine love, complete surrender to God. Now, we may say, oh, I surrender everything. We try to surrender. Surrender is the last word in spiritual life. So we make it our practice, and we try by visualizing at the end of our day that we're offering the fruits of all of our labor, all of our efforts at the feet of our chosen ideal, and throughout the day. And after each project we undertake, as we develop in our spiritual life, it becomes a more constant form of practice. When one has finally attained unconditional self-surrender, that means the lower self is surrendered, one has reached the goal, and that goal is unlimited love for God. And when that love is felt in the heart, an aspirant realizes his or her oneness with God. What is that feeling of oneness? As Christ said, "Be ye perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." That heaven, that perfection, is not something to be attained. It is a treasure that is already within us, but obstructed by our ignorance, our self-identification with this body, mind, and senses. So we may think, oh, that goal is too lofty. How can I ever attain that? That's just so far away. But if each one of you stopped to think what your life would be without Vedanta, without your chosen ideal, without your prayer life, without your active life that is dedicated to God, what would your world be like? It would turn gray. And so that, right now, is a measure of your devotion. Amrito bhavati means immortal. One who has attained perfection is no longer attached to the body and therefore no longer fears death. It is our attachment to the body, our body consciousness, that veils us from realizing we are pure spirit. One day, Sri Ramakrishna said, there are some who do not want to dive into the ocean. They say, won't we become deranged if we go to excess about God? Referring to those who are intoxicated with divine love, they say, these people have lost their heads, but they don't understand this simple thing. God is the ocean of Amrita, immortality. Sri Ramakrishna continued, once I said to Narendra, the future Vivekananda, suppose there were a cup of syrup and you were a fly, where would you sit to drink the syrup? Narendra answered, I would sit on the edge of the cup and stretch out my neck to drink it. Why? I asked. What's the harm of plunging into the middle of the cup and drinking the syrup? Naren answered, then I would stick in the syrup and die. My child, Sri Ramakrishna said to him, that isn't the nature of the nectar of Satchidananda. It is the nectar of immortality. Man does not die from dying into it. On the contrary, he becomes immortal. Sri Ramakrishna then said, therefore I say, dive deep. Don't be afraid. By diving deep in God, one becomes immortal. And we can all try doing this. It may be with baby steps in the beginning of our spiritual life, but so what? Who's measuring? We've taken to spiritual life, and that's our goal. We don't look back. When we as devotees experience that immortal love, we too become immortal. Yes, to be around such beings, and I've had the privilege of association with these great disciples of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, holy personalities. One becomes transformed in their presence, by their presence. That love that comes can never be taken from one. The recipient becomes one with it. Unlike the worldly fruits of our actions that are temporary. Swami Bhuteshananda, a great Swami of the order, was a disciple of Swami Saradananda, explained, love is never an effect. It is ever present. We are only unable to experience it. It's always there within us. And because it is not an effect, it never perishes. This love is therefore not an extraneous entity, but the self of the experiencer. In other words, we are of the nature of that Ananda, of Satchidananda. And when we come into the orbit of a God-realized person, they see that indwelling expression of Ananda within us, whether it be Sri Ramakrishna, Christ, Buddha, the Divine Mother, the Atman, whatever it may be. We appear as a glass house and they see the indweller within us. Tripta bhavati. By attaining it, a devotee becomes satisfied forever. That means we become free from all desires. What must that feel like? Swami Turiyananda explains supreme devotion cannot be had so long as there is the slightest desire in the mind. I want this, I want that, I hunger for this, I hunger for that. Forms big ripples in the mind. Ripples so big that we cannot see the lake bottom, which is our chosen ideal. So such desirelessness is a corollary of immortality. When we are free of all desires, the mind becomes pure, unruffled by these waves of the mind. Swami Ramakrishnananda, disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, explained the equation. The mind is like a big mirror which gives a perfect reflection, but which has been so thickly covered with dirt that nothing can be seen in it. The more you can rub off the dirt, the more you can see yourself in it. The more you can remove the least speck of dust, the more you get a perfect image of your true self. What is the dirt that hides the image? Selfish desires. However, when we desire God, and that desire grows within us until eventually it becomes all-consuming, it is ultimately transmuted into supreme love, which purifies the mind and washes away all dirt and dross of the mind, all selfish desires. That's how it works. Secondly, the path of devotion is the easiest way to sublimate all conflicting desires into one, the desire for God, which attenuates all impurities of the mind. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, anger and lust, meaning lust after things, after people, whatever it may be, after money, cannot be destroyed. Turn them toward God. If you must feel desire and temptation, then desire to realize God. Feel tempted by Him. Discriminate and turn the passions away from worldly objects. When the elephant is about to devour a plantain tree in someone's garden, the mahout strikes it with his iron-tipped goad. That's what we must be like. Ultimately, as Swami Ramakrishnananda explained, a lover of God understands that in God alone he can find the satisfaction of all desires, for he is infinite bliss, and all other desires are finite and perishable. So again and again, we find in this scripture that this love is not something abstract. It is living. It's a living presence. And we only have to awaken it. That's our job. Sutra 5. Yat prapya na kinchit vanshati na shochati na dveshti na ramate notsahi bhavati. On attaining that devotion, Narada tells us, the devotee does not desire anything else, does not grieve, is free from hatred, does not take pleasure in the vanities of life, and loses all desire to gain anything for oneself. So as a reminder, in verses 3 through 6, Narada is not describing Ghoni Bhakti or the preparatory stage of Bhakti. He is speaking of the para stage of Bhakti, which is prema, supreme. Sri Krishna also describes such a stage in the Gita, chapter 2, verses 55 to 57, which beautifully parallel this verse. Krishna says, he knows bliss in the Atman and wants nothing else. Cravings torment the heart. He renounces cravings. I call him illumined. Not shaken by adversity, not hankering after happiness, free from fear, free from anger, free from the things of desire. I call him a seer and illumined. The bonds of his flesh are broken. He is lucky and does not rejoice. He is unlucky and does not weep. I call him illumined. See? These qualities match those of astita pragya. Because supreme love is also supreme knowledge. In this sutra, Narada first states, on attaining that devotion, the devotee does not desire anything else. And so he is describing the para stage of bhakti, wherein supreme love is its own fulfillment. Why? Why, we may ask? No other experience could possibly top the bliss one receives from such devotion. Therefore, from such fulfillment, how could any further desire arise in the mind? In comparison to such a devotee, no other object of desire is worth having. There are such souls who have attained that. Wonderful devotees, monastics. It's within our reach. But we have to struggle. Furthermore, the fulfillment of such divine love is everlasting. It will never dwindle. In the Vivekachudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination by Adi Shankara, he sums up the state of desirelessness. The fruit of illumination, he says, is the stilling of desire. The fruit of still desire is experience of the bliss of the Atman, whence follows peace. And our chosen ideal is a symbol of that Atman, nothing less. Narada further states, on attaining that devotion, the devotee does not grieve. Vivekananda explains this state of mind. For such a person, all sorrows cease. One forgets the past, present, and future, and only thinks of thee alone. That is the madness of the lover, when all desires have vanished. Who cares for salvation? Who cares to be saved? Who cares to be perfect even? Who cares for freedom? Says the lover. I do not want wealth nor even health. I do not want beauty. I do not want intellect. Let me be born again and again amid all the evils that are in the world. I will not complain, but let me love thee, and that for love's sake. However, such a soul's heart is not stone. It melts in anguish for the suffering of others. And in Swami Vivekananda's case, it drove him to turn his selfless grief into one desire: to serve the living God. To do so, he founded the Ramakrishna Mission. And 2 months later, in July 1897, to his disciple Mary Hale, he bared his heart and selfless intent. I will sleep without caring what will be next, and may I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries so that I may worship the only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls, and above all, my God the wicked, my God the miserable, my God the poor of all races, of all species, is a special object of my worship. On attaining that devotion, the devotee is free from hatred and does not take pleasure in the vanities of life. That is our inspiration. And that is why the Ramakrishna Mission was the first in the Shankara order to begin selfless service to those who are poor, uneducated, also to women who are without education, who suffered, certain tragedies of a very strict society. It was unheard of in the Shankara order, and our swamis, though our pioneer swamis who started this work in hospitals and schools, in sanatoriums in disaster, fled fire and fire relief, fled famine and fire relief, were ostracized, were not invited to the Mandaleshwar's feast, annual feast, until one day, when that feast was about to occur, the Mandaleshwar said, "What? We will not begin without the Ramakrishna Mission sadhus here." Why? Because our first sadhus who started a hospital in Kankal, they just began in an apartment. They went out onto the streets and picked up the untouchables, the dying, and brought them back to their apartment, and then went out to beg medicines. So they were considered untouchable for having touched the untouchables and for doing this, which up until this time had never been done. The Shankara order only studied and practiced Advaita Vedanta. But then, when the sadhus began to see the spirituality that shone in the faces of these great swamis, Kalyananda was one, and to read their lives is really remarkable, disciples of Vivekananda. Their hearts changed, and also their sadhus who had fallen ill were saved by our swamis. And so that changed. And suddenly the Ramakrishna order was accepted. It was always accepted as a Shankara order because it was established as a Shankara order, but it was accepted by other sadhus in the Shankara order, the Dasanami. Hatred arises when obstacles prevent us from attaining our selfish desires, but a lover of God always feels oneness with his or her beloved. Swami Bhuteshananda also explains in his commentary on the Narada Bhakti Sutras, such a person does not have antipathy toward anybody or anything. You see? No antipathy towards untouchables, so-called untouchables. This is because obviously he sees God's hand in everything and also sees that it is God who is residing in all beings. Therefore, whom will he hate? A beautiful example of this unparalleled love was related by Emma Calvé, famous singer and actress, when she traveled to Cairo with Vivekananda and a group of friends. They lost their way in the city and found themselves in a squalid, ill-smelling street where half-clad women lolled from their windows and sprawled on doorsteps. Swami Vivekananda walked, noticing nothing, until a noisy group of women on a bench in the shadows of a dilapidated building began laughing and calling out to him. The lady in the travel party tried to hurry him along, but Swami Vivekananda detached himself gently from the group and approached the women on the bench. Poor child, he said. Poor creatures. They have put their divinity into their bodies. Look at them now. And he began to weep, as Jesus might have done before the woman taken in adultery. The women were silenced and abashed. One of them leaned forward and kissed the hem of his robe, murmuring brokenly in Spanish, Hombre de Dios, man of God. Also, advanced devotees have no false feeling of elation in pursuing vain, fleeting pleasures, because their hearts are established in Brahman, the eternal treasure within. In the sutra, the devotee loses all desire to gain anything for oneself. What does that mean? What does it look like? In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, Sri Krishna says, when a man has found delight and satisfaction and peace in the Atman, remember he's talking to a man, Arjuna, then he is no longer obliged to perform any kind of action. He has nothing to gain in this world by action and nothing to lose by refraining from action. He is independent of everybody and everything. It's important to note that there is a vast difference between a God-realized soul who is at peace within oneself and therefore not driven by the desire to act, and someone who has no motivation and therefore avoids work. A bhakta, a lover of God who dwells in God, is full and therefore exhibits no excessive desire, whereas one who avoids work is lazy and embodies tamas, sloth. Again, Swami Bhuteshananda beautifully illustrates the difference between the work of a God-realized soul and that of a lazy, inert person. He writes, suppose a pot is full inside and outside. Imagine that pot immersed in an ocean. There is no water inside it. There is water inside it and outside it. Can we imagine any movement in that water? No, we cannot. Movement would mean that water is flowing to a place where there is no water. Movement always means that. Emptying from one and filling another. Now that, the bhakta, is immersed in that love, both inside and outside, so there cannot be any movement. That is why he does not feel compelled to attain or do anything. But from my own experience, I can say that such a soul is love itself, and their life is dedicated to serving others. Nevertheless, Sri Krishna urges the advanced devotee to act. Why? In verses 20 and 21, he says, your motive in working should be to set others by your example on the path of duty. Whatever a great man does, ordinary people will imitate. They follow his example. In other words, Krishna explains how men and women of God point us in the direction of karma yoga, exalted, selfless action that is palpable to the observer. It's palpable. When your action is selfless, it's palpable. In verse 326, Sri Krishna states in the Gita, let them show by example how work is holy when the heart of the worker is fixed on the highest. It's something to behold yoga in action, action motivated by the will of God, a divine pull one feels from within one's own heart. Swami Vishuddhananda reminisced about Swami Brahmananda, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna. He said, I was with Maharaj in Benares. One day we went to the temple of Vishwanath. There were many other persons in the party. As he entered the temple, Maharaj saw a sweeper cleaning the compound. Maharaj took the broomstick from the man's hand and began to sweep the place himself. We felt he was showing us that if one goes to a temple to see the deity, one must have this attitude of humility. Seeing Maharaj's example, one of the devotees also began to sweep, but it seemed artificial. What Maharaj did was natural. It looked so beautiful and was so inspiring. Sutra 6. Yat gyatva mata bhavati stabdha atmaramaha bhavati. The devotee may first become intoxicated with bliss. Then, having realized that, he becomes inert and silent and finds joy in his own self. God intoxication differs greatly from our ordinary happiness or even our elation, and that depends on external circumstances or objects. Such bliss is derived solely from the self, the higher self. At first, absorbed in one's joy, the devotee feels God intoxicated. Then, as one becomes more and more absorbed in the self, one becomes full and inert, and the external world disappears. This is a state of the highest samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi. A beautiful description of the state of bliss-filled intoxication we can find in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna was in the company of Brahmo members. Suddenly the master stood up and went into samadhi, repeating the mother's name. Coming down a little to the plane of the sense consciousness, he danced and sang. I drink no ordinary wine, but wine of everlasting bliss. As I repeat my mother Kali's name, it so intoxicates my mind that people take me to be drunk. First, my guru gives molasses for the making of the wine. My longing is the ferment to transform it. Knowledge is the maker of the wine. It prepares it for me then. And when it is done, my mind imbibes it from the bottle of the mantra, taking the mother's name to make it pure. Drink of this wine, says Ram Prasad, and the four fruits of life are yours. There's no set formula of behavior for a God-realized devotee. However, Sri Ramakrishna has described the various stages of consciousness that correspond to the 7 chakras within ourselves, each and every one of ourselves, and the 7 ascending planes of mind that correspond to those chakras. He said, when the mind is immersed in worldliness, it dwells in the 3 lower planes, at the navel, the organ of generation, and the organ of evacuation. In that state, the mind loses its higher visions. It broods only on lust and greed. The 4th plane of the mind is at the heart. When the mind dwells there, one has the first glimpse of spiritual consciousness. It's a felt experience. One sees light all around. Such a man, perceiving the divine light, becomes speechless with wonder and says, ah, what is this? What is this? His mind does not go downward to the objects of the world. The fifth plane of the mind is at the throat. When the mind reaches this, the aspirant becomes free from all ignorance and illusion. He does not enjoy talking or hearing about anything but God. If people talk about worldly things, he leaves the place at once. The sixth plane is at the forehead. When the mind reaches it, the aspirant sees the form of God day and night. But even then, a little trace of ego remains. At the sight of that incomparable beauty of God's form, one becomes intoxicated and rushes forth to touch and embrace it. But one doesn't succeed. It is like the light inside a lantern. One feels if one could touch the light, but one cannot on account of the pain of glass. In the top of the head is the seventh plane. When the mind rises there, one goes into samadhi. Then the Brahmagyani directly perceives Brahman. But in that state, his body does not last many days. He remains unconscious of the outer world. If milk is poured into his mouth, it runs out. Dwelling on this plane of consciousness, he gives up his body in 21 days. Sri Ramakrishna lived 6 months in that state of consciousness. We read in Sri Ramakrishna, the great master, sometimes the I consciousness was fully dissolved and signs of death appeared in his body, but he had an unobstructed vision of the Divine Mother within. Again, sometimes a little I consciousness would appear and some signs of life would return. At that time, he would see the Divine Mother through the thin veil of pure, clean, and transparent mind, which was like that due to a preponderance of the sattva quality. Thus, sometimes I consciousness dissolved entirely, as did the mind's thought waves, and the Divine Mother was completely visible. Again, sometimes I consciousness would manifest to some extent, so minor modifications of the mind remained, and the Divine Mother was visible, although slightly obstructed. This happened again and again. Fortunately, at this time, a wandering monk came to Dakshineshwar and understood Sri Ramakrishna's death-like state and tried to bring him back to a little consciousness so he could then force feed him with a few morsels of food. Sri Ramakrishna referred to Narayan, the future Vivekananda, as a Nitya Siddha, eternally perfect, and a Dhyana Siddha, perfect in meditation. But when he asked Narayan what he wanted, Narayan replied that he wanted to remain in the bliss of samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna then scolded him, "I thought you were a greater person and would like to be like a big banyan tree spreading its branches and casting its shade so that weary travelers could come and rest." Striving for God realization and selfless service for others are both noble ideals, but self-sacrifice for the sake of others is the greater. Narayan was to discover this when he was with Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar, along with other devotees in 1884. Sri Ramakrishna was asked to explain the Vaishnava doctrine. He answered, "Practice love of God's name, compassion for all beings, and service of devotees." As the master said, compassion for all beings, he suddenly went into samadhi. And when he came down to a semi-ecstatic state, he said, "How absurd! Not compassion, but service to all. Recognize all as manifestations of God. Serve them as such." Everyone heard the master's words, but only Naren understood their deep significance. He said, "What a wonderful light I have discovered in those words of the Master. The ideal of Vedanta lived by the recluse outside the pale of society can be brought from the forest to the home and applied to all aspects of daily life." He said, "The Master's words also shed a special light on the path of devotion. As long as an aspirant can't see God in every being, it isn't possible to attain true and supreme devotion." The followers of Karma Yoga and Raja Yoga, he said, will also find great light in the Master's words. Embodied beings cannot remain without activity for even a moment. So their duty is to perform every action as service to God within human beings. Mind you, Vivekananda was an Advaita Vedantin of the highest order. He ended by saying, "Serving man, knowing him to be the manifestation of God, purifies the heart, and in a short time, the aspirant who does this realizes that he is a part of God. Existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute."